have up, that's great. Otherwise, of course, we'll revisit at the end. So today we're talking about AP automation. It's a hot topic. It involves every industry I can see in the world right now, that everyone is looking to automate AP because there's so many efficiencies built in this tool that as you're scaling your business and building efficiencies with your business, right? This tool allows you to go a lot of directions and see some quick ROI, which is finance people on the call can get excited about that, right? So I'm going to hand it over to Pete. He's going to walk you through the details of it. Again, if there's any questions along the way, this is meant to be an interactive session, so you guys leave here with your questions answered. It's not just about us talking. We're going to be really great listeners today. Make sure we hear everything you guys are saying so you get the most out of this call. Afterwards, we'll talk next steps so that you guys know how to connect with Pete and let him know where in the process you are in learning about APU. Some of you might already have researched a lot and you're like, okay, this is kind of my final step. Maybe some of you are coming in brand new to this and have a little more learning to do. So let Pete know at the end where you're at with that, and he can help guide you on that next step. So thank you, Pete. Take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Stephanie. Also, just as a heads up in terms of the focus for today, I put up on here, for AP Automation Day, it's Smarter AP with an ROI focus. So we'll talk a little bit about that at the end, but I want to get right into the product right away because, as Stephanie said, a lot of people are familiar with what AP Automation is, et cetera. In terms of what we typically do after this presentation is geared around higher level concepts. And so after we get through the presentation, if you're looking for something more deep dive, we do a couple different things. We do a full live demo using our own documents that we have set up that works pretty well to show other features, get a little more into the neat details. And then, of course, we also do specific custom demos. So if you want to, if you're interested in engagement like that, we need documents, data, that sort of thing. We'll get you a quote, and we'll do actual live work with your documents and your data. So that's something that's been pretty popular lately too. You really want to see the rubber hit the road. If you have some challenging documents, that sort of thing, we can do that too. So with that said, we'll get going. So AP Automation Day. So our focus here, how intelligent invoices and payment automation are improving folks' processing. So refining the financial efficiency in that space it really gets into a lot of different details. There's how do things arrive, how do they move through the system, what happens after, all of that. And we're going to go over many of those. So in terms of the challenge, I'm just going to touch on this just as a reminder. Maybe there are things that you're feeling every day. Maybe some are things you don't always think about because they might happen outside your department. So manual AP is time consuming and error prone. If you're doing the AP process, you know about this very well. Whether it has to do with the data entry steps that are challenging, or just because somebody could be mistyping something, or you're using rulers, side-by-side documents, or you have some contraption set up on your screen to help you look across monitors and figure out if line items are lining up, et cetera. If you're still using the paper, of course, the paper invoices, manual keying, and the delayed approvals, the approvals being an additional hidden cost, because the time it takes to get things approved ends up affecting the other things that are tied to the payment process. So you've got your high labor costs, the delays associated with something where you've sent it out and it's had to be looked at multiple times. If you send it to a buyer and then they didn't look at it, or then they did, but they didn't get back to you, then they got to look at it again. It's taking more time from them as well. And the physical cost of those documents is something that we dive into as well. A lot of times we'll do that with our document management side, which we can expand on later. But it ties in directly with the AP process as well. Where are those documents? How do they get to the office? If you're using paper and there's a physical process to move them from the warehouse where maybe receiving's happening and get it back up, someone's having to do those processes too. Lost or delayed approvals. This one's a big challenge. You've got scenarios where someone has replied to an email, but then it's on an email inbox, a single thread, and that's where everyone's looking. And so if someone else sends a question because they didn't see someone's response, the approval could be in that email thread, but no one saw it because a different reply came in later and someone looked at the more recent reply. Then, of course, that results in missed early payment discounts. And this is a big one for clients that deal with this challenge. We go into the specifics with you on terms of what percentage you think you're getting on that and how many different vendors you get that from. And how that would affect, if we're able to speed up that process and ensure that you get those discounts, that's a big deal too. And this is a really big one, lack of visibility. If you're involved in leadership and guidance for the group, for your team, this is a big deal. And we have some ability to help with that. Everything that happens in this system is fully tracked. So when you think about audit preparedness, it goes further than just the documents. It's about the actions that were committed on those documents as well. And that's all recorded. Now, inefficiency of manual payment methods. This is one where at the end of the process, how are you sending out payments? Are they paper checks today? Is there minimal ACH payments? You want to boost that number? Those are things that we also get involved in. I'm not going to dive deep into that today, but that's an example of something that in a live demo or additional follow-up meetings, we would typically go deeper into that area and talk more about that. How are you doing it today? What are your goals? How have you tried to attack that, et cetera? So common industry cost on invoices. This is actually an old number. It's 18 the last time I had pulled it. That was probably a couple of years old now. I think the last number I saw was around $21 an invoice. So either way, pretty challenging trying to follow that process and maintain those costs if you're doing it with paper today. So introducing smarter AP automation, what you're here to learn about. So at a high level, we're talking about an AI-driven automation for ingesting the documents, whether they're paper or electronic. We'll touch on that in a moment. Then also automating the three-way matching and reconciliation against that data. And we'll talk about what it means to automate that because it's a question of what happens depending on what you find. So we're going to go into that too. Then the approval automation with exception handling for remote support, work support. This is where, okay, so now we know there's potentially an issue, something needs to be looked at. Where does it go next, right? Then ERP integrations, because these systems really cannot function without a good integration. You've got to have the data from the ERP and you have to be able to pass data back to the ERP. And so if whatever ERP you're working with, please let us know. We probably already have an integration to it. If not, there's a couple different ways to go about that. We can talk about too. Then capturing all invoices and supporting documents into a centralized CMS. Now that's a little different than the capture up front. That's where we're getting it into the system for analysis. But at the end, you still need to keep that document. You don't want to print it back out to paper and then have to save it in a cabinet, right? So we talk about what that looks like as well. And that can actually be expanded outside the AP department too. And of course, at the end of the day, it all has to work within an affordable cloud-based solution where you're getting an ROI in months, not years. So, all right, so how does it work, right? So this solution specifically begins with capture. Where does the document come from? There's more than one place. So the first thing we typically think of is the inbox. So Smarter AP actually monitors your AP inbox or multiple, if you want to separate that out so you have expenses coming into one spot and inventory invoices coming into another, and then scanners as well. And the idea is to bring those copies into the system, up into the cloud. And when they arrive, what happens is the system starts to analyze those documents before any person is even notified about them. That notification process happens after something's found. But before any of that, the system is already actively working on the documents that you've provided. So the invoices that match PO and receiving data at the line item and total levels, they're going to automatically pass through the system, which is a huge savings. If you think about that, it depends a little bit on the industry that you're in. For some of the industries we work with, you're talking 30 to 50%. Other industries, it could be 70% or higher. Depends on how many exceptions you run into. The challenge with that is that when you look for these things, it's a question of how much time is required to handle for the exceptions, right? So anything that we can move through automatically is pretty smart. So when you talk about analyzing the exceptions, everything begins with a verification queue. So anyone who's working in the system is going to have a customized layout that's based on your login. So your login, when you log into it, would look different than my own. You might be either moving columns or adding columns in. You might be sorting and filtering against that data. And then you might want to reorder the columns. As a simple example, you probably want the due date on the left-hand side if you're the one dealing with the documents that come in first. If you're just handling approvals that get sent to you later, that might not be so important. Anything that gets sent to you, you're going to deal with it the same day and move it on out of the system. So it's geared around those specific needs based on your user. And then when you want to process something, if someone's looking in the system, you can just click on any of these, or you can select specific ones and then hit start to start working through those documents. What happens then is when the system opens, it brings you to a view that has several things going on. The first thing that we notice on the right-hand side is that there is a section of data that's been extracted from the document and from what information is pulled from your system. It's essentially the high-level information. If you think about an invoice, it's like the stuff at the top and some of the stuff at the bottom. that information has already got some highlights happening. The system is going to use colors that we are trained as people. We just know that yellow and red get our attention. So the system's been built to use that to draw your attention. And we're not telling you something's critically wrong. We're letting you know that there's something that needs your attention. And so here you can see that yellow is being used to indicate that there's a comment on this document. It's also being used to show that those date boxes had something to look at. And we're going to go into that in more detail in just a moment. But whatever those issues are, as a user, you would deal with those, and then you would move over the document forward through the process by hitting OK. That's typically happening at the beginning of the process when someone's doing a verification or an initial review. So that's going to be your AP verifiers or maybe your buyers, depending on how we set up your workflows. For documents that have actual issues, when that opens up, the first thing it's going to do is going to use those colors. You might see a red box around an extraction if you've clicked on the extraction. You'll see yellow boxes around the elements that have been extracted. That's what this table is at the bottom. That's an extraction table. And then next to this extraction, you can see a Post-it essentially with the information about this. So you wouldn't have to go any further to know what's happening. It says the invoice unit price is greater than the purchase order unit price. And then it tells you 542 so that you can actively compare that value without having to go any further into the system. However, if you wanted to, you can actually see where that data, that comparison is coming from. Maybe you haven't used the system much, maybe you're curious. Essentially, the highlighted item is coming from the data that's behind the scenes that's viewable by using this magnifying glass on the left. If you click on one of these, it's going to open the combined data view. Now, in here, we've got PO information on the left. Then there's receiving information. You can see here delivered quantity. And we also have some invoicing quantity information as well. So you're really, we call it a three-way match, but you're really getting more like a four-way match because of the invoice information. And we'll talk about what each of those means. Again, you'll also notice that the layout of this table is the same as that initial table that you saw. And that's because familiarity is built around seeing something more than once and keeping that set up as similar as possible to what you're used to working with so you know how tables work in the system. So again, here, there's a box at the top that's for filtering and sorting. So if it was line 300, you could type in 300 if it was a really long invoice and it would bring you right to it. Again, the delivered quantity and the invoice quantity would be the values that you want to verify. And you can see right here that 542 is the value that the Post-it note was telling us about. So we can see where that's coming from, which is helpful. Now from here, we would potentially look at other information that's provided with this. So in this scenario, we don't necessarily know the pricing. We're assuming that the AP verifier is the one looking at this. They're not necessarily the buyer that deals directly with the vendor. So we want to send a message. We're going to say, please confirm the price on line 3. And then we're going to go back to the return data view. We're going to return to the data view. And then we're going to update the pricing, the dates. And those dates, just so you know, they're orange there. It's giving us a little warning because this document was processed previously. And so it's older. So it's telling you, hey, this document is outside of the normal payable range. Additionally, on the invoice due date line, that part of the document is being measured against your vendor data, not against the information that's on the invoice. It's looking in, it's saying, for this vendor, what are my terms? If I have 10-day terms, but the invoice says that it's due 30 days later, right, net 30, the 10 days is what will flag that. It will say, you need to pay it in 10 days because that's what you need in order to get your discount. So that one's already yellow. Okay. Now, additionally, if I want to go in and I'm not sure who the buyer is for some reason, maybe I don't automatically know, maybe I don't want to just have the system automatically pass it through, which it can, I could look it up. So this, anything that's underlined is a link. And so here I'm clicking on PO and opening the data associated with the PO, and I can see that buyer 2 is the contact. So I can type in anything I know about buyer 2. It could be the buyer's name. It could be the 2. It's whatever we've set the system up with, in which we rely on you all. Then typing in 2 here, I can see the buyer 2 selected and I hit OK. So again, there, I'm essentially choosing the workflow instead of relying on a default workflow. It's up to you how you want to use the system there. Clicking OK moves that document on down the road through the workflow process. We're going to come back to that in a minute. For now, I'm going to show you a non-material or an expense invoice, right? So that first one was inventory or a material invoice. So looking at one of these, this one's called the computer company. So this is essentially some kind of a bill that would have come in from maybe IT. And you can see this, you've got, again, these underlines here, which would be links that we could use. But the first thing we do is validate any issues. Again, you can see the invoice date and due date are telling me that the invoice date is outside the normal range and the due date is in the warning area for when it needs to be paid so that you can get your discount. Going through and approving those clears out those things. And so now you could be pretty close to passing it across. However, we're going to assign it for routing. We'll put the IT director in there, and then we're going to click refresh on the GL codes. Now, in reality, the system will learn the GL codes that you use. And the GL code information is one of the elements that we're pulling in from your ERP. So effectively, if you have multiple companies, okay, let's say you have company A and company B that you work under the same label, you could have GL codes that are associated with one company and not associated with another. The same thing with your vendors. It's fully separated out. And then you could choose which buyer you're using. So here up at the top, you can see buyer. I can have different buyers. So I might have company 1, company 2. And by switching between those, all of those data sets are changing in the background and using that. So you have a lot of control there. Now, if you look at this and you don't have GLs applied, you could do this several different ways. We can let you apply GL codes at the front of the process and have the accounting team do it if you want them to. You can let the buyers do it if that's okay, or managers. It depends on your rules. Very large organizations, a lot of times the GL coding is allowed to happen further down. They'll train the managers to do that. I worked with Caesars Entertainment, and that was the way they did it there. But for smaller organizations, depending on how big you are, you may want to have the AP team doing that. But in reality, when the document comes in, it will have already been there. If it wasn't, you can click this refresh button and it would trigger the system to make its recommendation. That recommendation is based off of not only the vendor, but the information that's in the line item information. So it's basing it truly off of what it sees in that document. That's where AI is being leveraged in the background. Hitting OK says this one's good to move on down the line. So that's going to send it over to the IT director. Now, that's essentially the beginning of the process. Before I go any further, are there any questions over that? Just a little past the halfway point? Okay, I'll keep going. So with routing from through the workflows process, what happens here is if you think about being an approver. If you're an approver, it's very possible that you do not live in the system. So the system will send you an email to let you know if there's something that you need to look at. And when you open that email, it'll give you a list of information that you need to look at, or documents you need to look at, and it'll put a button in there that says review for approval. Clicking on that button will jump you out and open the web page automatically. If you've got Windows Auth set up, it probably just opens straight to it. Very possibly you won't even have to log in. Once this opens, you've got your view just like before, and you can choose how to work through those. You could say select all and do all of them at once. You could pick the ones, you could prioritize them, sort, etc. Moving through that, jumping into any one of them, it's going to open up that similar view again. And this is really important, okay? The view needs to be the same, because if you don't remember and you don't use the system all the time, you might want to call somebody else that does use the system all the time and ask them a question. That allows your team to help one another, which keeps you guys moving forward. So here, as you open it, you can see that the yellow indicator is up here on the comments. So any approver is going to know to check that. Does it have something going on? It's yellow. It does. So it says, hey, please review and approve. So in this case, I would take a look at the document, and they might look at that and say, you know what, I think that bill should have been part of our maintenance contract. I don't think we should have been sent this. So you can click to email the vendor and then enter in a message. I thought this would be covered under maintenance, and you could send that out. You could add a separate hold if you wanted to. It will automatically hold the invoice in a state that it says it's waiting. It's not quite the same as hold. It depends on what level of hold you want on it. If you do decide to put it on hold, you can add a reason for that. If it's something a little bit longer, maybe the vendors also maybe you've got some issue with them, and so you're holding it for a different purpose, not just because you're waiting on feedback. So additionally, if they respond and let you know what, this really was supposed to be covered under maintenance, you're right, then you can reject that invoice and you can say this is covered under maintenance, and that would move the document out of the system. The other scenario, we'll look at the flip side of that. Let's say that they don't reject the invoice. Instead, they say, you know what, this is for X, Y, and Z. That's technically not covered under your contract, so the invoice is valid. Then they might say, okay, this is okay to pay. So they add an okay to pay message and hit okay, the green okay button, and move it on down the line. Now, down the line, what does that mean? If we look at the bottom, there are scenarios where as a user, you might want to know where this is going next. maybe it's a more complex review process, and you look down and you see, oh, this is going to Stephanie next, then it's going back to AP. But you're like, well, wait, Stephanie's out of town. Where's that going to go? The system would actually allow Stephanie to update her that she's out and have somebody defaulted in her stead. So, if she's out and maybe we're going to have Beth or someone else from our team go over those documents for approvals, the system would automatically move it to Beth, and the system would tell you who it was going to there as well. So you would be able to look at that and see what's happening. So you can say, oh, wait, Stephanie's out. That's why it says it's going to Beth next, right? So it gives you that visibility into what's happening next also. In the background, after you've pushed these things through for approval, several things happen. First, data is pushed over to your ERP system, essentially the invoice data. Most of the ERP systems that we work with, this creates the invoice in the system, which eliminates the manual process that you normally would have to do, right? So again, you think about at the beginning of the process, how we can automatically move invoices through. That's another step that's being eliminated where you're not having to review those. Now we're talking about not having to manually enter invoices into your system. It's a pretty big deal. So from there, PDFs of the AP documents are pushed over to content storage. So what does that mean? I didn't show it there, but there is an attachment spot. So if you wanted to attach other documents into the system, you can do that through this initial portal. You don't have to do it that way. Our content management element, the long-term archiving that we typically provide with the system, it can be set up to bring documents in from other processes. And that part of the system can actually match everything up after the fact and batch things together. So you might have those initial documents like your purchase order and your receiving documents that were created. They might already be in the content system. So you might not need to attach them. Again, removing steps. The goal around this is to make it as efficient as possible. And when I talk about capturing those other documents that become a part of this, what I really am referring to is before it even touches paper. We catch it in the data stream from the host system before it gets printed, and then enter it and save it into the system, and also make sure it gets to the printer if needed. So if you think about documents that are associated with that process, it's pretty powerful. So in terms of payments, those would be ready for processing via check and ACH. And we don't kick the payments off and we don't do the payment processing yet, although we're talking about adding that on for some clients. What we're doing today is we capture your data when you initialize a payment stream from your core system, whether it's NCR or VII or something else, SysPro. Capture that data and then generate physical checks for vendors that require physical checks. We can also generate electronic payments via ACH to process and pass over to the bank. We can automatically do that, or we can allow you to review it. When you do electronic payments, or if you're sending physical checks, you usually need to notify the vendor, or they would like to be notified that there's a payment that's coming and what it's for. So we have the ability to generate dummy checks, which would say void on them, and email that as an attachment on an email that also provides the remittance information. So if you're paying for 3 different invoices with a total amount for a given check, we would tell in the remittance information that we're paying for checks 1, 2, and 3, and the full total amount and the amount of each check, etc. And then what those checks were, what they were covering, which invoices, etc. So it gives you the ability to process that information ahead of time. Pretty powerful. And that same automated notification capability, we most often end up expanding that later. It's usually the case that once clients have this system in place, they also want to use the capabilities for other things like automatically notifying clients, your own clients, when you generate a credit for them, right? So there's a lot that we can do with the system in terms of expanding its capabilities after it's in place. All right, so those are the capabilities of the system. The next most important thing is, how do we justify this? How do we pay for this solution, et cetera? So achieving an ROI, how do we get there? Essentially, it starts with several things. A centralized invoice management, one platform, no paper silos. Paper silos can be a real problem. If you just think about your organization and you can imagine whichever documents are still paper, and then ask yourself, where are they? There's probably a lot of answers to that question. Well, some of them are here and some of them are over there and they're all over the place. And that has a lot of challenges associated with it. So being able to have a localized central place for those is a big deal for a lot of different reasons, not just knowing where the documents are and being able to find them, But in terms of reducing the cost on those, the physical paper itself, the cost of cabinets, the space that it takes up, the real estate, right? I had a client that was looking at that went forward with moving more paperless. They were planning on potentially buying a warehouse, and that's kind of what drove their question around being able to do things to help eliminate some of the paper, because they realized that a large portion of their warehouse, or more than one warehouse, were being used for paper storage. So that's something we can definitely talk about, help you build a more specific ROI around as well. Then automating the data capture, eliminating manual keying and errors. Man, this is a really big deal. You have team members that are doing this process today, and they do their absolute best. And what typically happens is that during the process, you can have errors that end up being introduced for a lot of different reasons. Couldn't quite read what the value was, moving a little too quickly. And as soon as that bad data is in there, it stays in there and just moves on through the system and creates problems elsewhere. So it's a big deal. Additionally, accelerating approvals. We've talked about that a little bit. Rules-based routing with faster cycle times. Being able to get things through the system with no touching, a big deal, really big deal. Then real-time visibility and control into tracking the status, accruals, and bottlenecks. When you think about that queue, when it opens, anyone that's in the AP team and that's looking at that, they're going to see right away, hey, why is this thing stalling out? And as soon as you sort it by due date, those ones come right to the top. You can also have them flagged so that it'll show you right away which ones are overdue and haven't been touched. You can get on the horn and figure out why we have a delay with that. And then, of course, if that's a delay, it was caused by the vendor, you might be able to get some leeway in terms of getting your discounts too. So, and then on the end of that, automating payments and eliminating physical printing of checks. It's a big part of what people are looking for as well, trying to reduce those costs further. So, in terms of completing the AP process, we talked about the data, the ACH dummy check that being stored, and then the physical printing. The ERP outputs the ACH batch file. smrtr generates what's called a notcha file. So if you're curious about those details, we can talk about, there's more than one kind of notcha file, but for the most part, it's that main piece. Then we can securely transfer that over to the bank automatically. And then the email PDF remittance, talked about that a little bit, being able to send that ahead to the vendors, gives them that heads up that they like to have. Then auto archiving the remittance and confirmation into the CMS. And then reducing or even eliminating the check printing, cutting 5 to 10 hours, and reducing fraud risk. This is a big one. These days, fraud risk is always something people are curious about, and helping to reduce those checks end up being a big one, because check washing is still something that happens today. Surprising as that sounds, it does still happen. In terms of the impact on the ROI, I'm not going to go into this in great detail because we've only got a couple minutes left, but effectively, the impact on this ends up being a reduction from the $20 range down to below $5. I've had clients that are achieving under $3, so really impressive improvements on that. In terms of the overall 7-year ROI, if you stretch this out over the course of the normal usage for most folks with a system like this, you're talking 300 to 400% typical payback on just the ACH piece now. We're talking 6 to 8 months. So pretty surprising. If you're not already doing ACH, you really want to be. If you think about your own organization and say, well, what would this impact look like for us? So most of the time, whether you're doing 5,000 or 50,000 invoices, the direct cost savings ends up being for 1,000 invoices about $80,000 over 7 years. So a pretty powerful impact. Obviously, our clients are usually doing quite a bit more than that. Most common range, probably 15,000 up to 80 to 100,000. So anywhere in there, most of our clients are doing something like that. And then labor reallocation, having your team be able to do more work. Also, the system, of course, is web-based, so you can have folks work remotely. So if there's ever another COVID or something like that where people can't come into work, still able to get the job done. And the early payment discounts. So I'll just bring this up and we'll open it up to questions. In terms of takeaways, obviously we're talking about reducing costs, increasing productivity, and archiving or achieving the payback within 4 to 6 months typically. Then extending that out with ACH automation and strengthening your compliance visibility and sustainability. So from there, if you want to scan any of these barcodes, you can find out more information on the one on the right, and you can scan the one on the left to schedule with my calendar. So with that, we're technically at time, or if there are any questions, we're happy to answer those for those who can stay on, and we can send out any answers to the questions after the fact for those that can't stay on. I'll hand it back to you, Stephanie.
Perfect. Thanks. Yeah, we had a full hour booked. You definitely
Oh, we did.
rocked
Good.
that out. Yeah. So I
I
was
was thinking
like,
we'd
man, are
cut
we
it
at
shorter
time? I
like our
didn't.
last one.
Yeah, you talk really fast. So maybe we'll slow down and go back through a few key points to make sure everyone got what they needed. Holden's on live right now. I'd love it if just tell me really quick what company you're with and your role at your company so I can make sure we're talking the same talk. Go ahead.
Food Pro.
Yeah, no, good afternoon. Yeah,
Hey,
I'm
Holden.
Holden. I work with Fruit Pro, and I am all of AP for everything. So this has been, wonderful to see, and it speaks to just everything that I do. Um, I did have a
What do
couple
you use right
questions.
now? What do you guys do
Uh,
for? Mhm.
we use NCR,
Mhm.
and
Do
everything
they
is
have
manual entry.
stuff built into it, like a base model of AP?
Yeah, we have AP models through there, but nothing, no sort of automation.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I go through and I use the AP modules that they have to input everything, but I don't have any sort of automation with the invoice inside, the PO side, or it's, as you said, very, very time consuming at times. And if
Yeah.
things can be washed any which way, then great. uh, and so, yeah, everything looks phenomenal. I unfortunately didn't have any more of the team that I was hoping on my side to be here, but I appreciate recording this that way I can have them go over it.
Right. I'll
So
send it to you.
yeah, I have a quick question then, because I
Yeah,
know
absolutely.
Suzanne and I had done some presentations for you all
Uh,
previously. Did you get to be on
yeah.
those?
One, it was last
Okay.
June actually, and
Yeah, yeah.
I remember she was asking how many we had on our team for AP, and
Right.
she seemed kind of shocked when they said one, and
Yeah.
understandably. um, so this is all green flags for me. Looking at surface level, obviously
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
going to be more in depth, and just two, I guess, top level questions. When there's a PO that has, if it's for a redistribution like DOT or GNC and stuff like that,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
we have one buyer on our PO that's listed, but obviously multiple buyers will purchase from them on a single PO. Is the system capable of learning who the buyer is per line, or is it just the per PO that it identifies? Or I guess in that sense, would it just kind of be on my end to send it to whoever needs to confirm like a pricing per se?
Yeah, that's a good question. So because you could have more than one buyer in your organization working on one, like for the same thing, we wouldn't want to try to decide to automate it based on the line items. We would base that on the vendor. So in your case, you've got more than one buyer dealing with the same vendor. So yeah, you would just choose like I did there and just put the buyer on it. But but that PO lookup would be handy, right? So if a buyer, if you and I are both buyers and I create a or Stephanie and I are both buyers since you're on the AP side. Stephanie and I will be buyers. I create a PO, right? And in the system, and then she creates a PO in the system. Then when it comes in there, you might not know, right? Wait, was it me or was it Stephanie? So you'd be able to look up, just like I did in the demo where I clicked on the PO because it's underlined, it's a link. It links out to the PO data, and that's one of the values is the buyer information. So it would tell you exactly who you should send it to.
Awesome. No, that's great. And not that it would be any hassle.
Yeah.
Thankfully I know the buyers and have an idea now, but just in case someone else were to come in, or
Yeah,
eventually
it's
we
a good
do get a
question.
second person.
Yeah, absolutely,
And
absolutely.
excuse me. Uh, Deduction. So I found it really nice that you were mentioning how it can coincide with the remittances and getting them out to the vendors and what
Yep.
have you. Now, fortunately, we have Truist, or that's our banking that we upload to, and then they cut the checks and send out
Mm-hmm.
remittance to the vendors. But oftentimes, the remittances don't carry a lot of the information, nor is
Mm-hmm.
there the ability to
Yep.
attach, the files. Where
Yep.
I was thinking, for the last couple of years, actually, how if there was a portal that I could maybe create or have for vendors that they could just log
Yeah.
into, but then getting Coke to do something on
Yep.
their end, that's going to be far in between, right? Like some of them are just not going to. But if I
Yeah.
can
So
go ahead and
there's
just have, okay.
Well, I was going to say one interesting thing, because you guys already have our document tool, that document creation tool with the workflow elements. That's actually the piece that we use in the back end. So like in your case, you don't need all the same elements that a typical client that gets AP would, because our AP solution is multiple modules that come together to make the solution, but you already have some of them. So what we would do for you there with the ACH piece, and specifically, we could do that now. And all you really need would be, it would be essentially professional services to set it up. And then we could do a couple things. So what you would do is you would take your payment file that comes out of NCR, and we would use that to generate essentially dummy checks, because you're going to have the bank Truist, you're going to have them send it out, right? But what we would do is use that to generate the information. Now, you could do it one of two ways. I won't get too deep in the weeds, but basically you could take a file before you send it to Truist, and we could use that and generate them. But if you get a response file back, I'd recommend maybe we wait. And then if we have the transaction IDs from them, we could include that in the communications that we send out to your vendors. So then your vendors would basically get an email with a dummy check on it, and then the remittance information, and we would be including the transaction ID if it's provided from Truist, right? And so then you would have pretty sweet communication going out to them, and then they would know with better detail. In fact, I think you could just call you and customize it if they want, and say, hey, one of your vendors, maybe it's Dot, they say, hey, I need it broken out a little bit better detail, whatever that might be, then we could do that, right? We have full control over what is going to them from a notification perspective. So there could be some nice wins around that to help streamline that, especially if you get a lot of calls or things like that, where it ends up kind of eating up time in your day, and you can think of how the information that we could provide in an automated communication like that, it could be pretty helpful. So, but if you want to talk more about it, by all means, we can set up a time and dig into it in more detail.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, because it's just with the backup stuff for when deductions are made, whether they're manual side or not. It's just me and one other individual who, with TrackMax, oftentimes vendors ignore the emails that are sent out through when we process stuff for that. And then they come back and they're wanting the backup. I'm like, well, here it is, but we sent it to here. But if we had that automation side where I can just go ahead and deal with it, and then that's just more time that I get towards everything else.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Which sounds like you could use some white space in your calendar.
I'm inundated for sure.
I get that.
Even just.
Well, can I ask a quick question?
I'm sorry.
So I was going to ask a quick question. If I remember right, I think you have either NG or Express. I want to say it's NG, right? For our content management, for where your documents are stored.
S4I.
Yeah. So is it the one that's on your IBM, or is it on? Do you know if it's on Windows?
I do not know. That'd be a question for our IT guy, Eli.
I could double check. Well, either way, so what we could do a couple things. If you're not on the newer version, smrtr Access is what we're calling it. We're trying to get the logos updated, but it's not there yet. But that one's web-based, so you can access it from anywhere. So if it's something you want to dig into, like in terms of the notification side, that system has some ability to do some of the notifications too, depending on, like, we might construct everything and then hand it over and then have that side send it out. Those are all things we can dig into. But because you have a content management system, one of the things that's important that I touched on there at the end was that when the data flow through the system, and so we have the purchase orders and the receiving documents, which should already probably be saved in your content management. It's a really good example of why I don't show doing the attachment in the demo typically, because in your case, those documents are already saved. So what happens instead is when the invoice passes through the AP process, and let's say you're looking at it, you're like, you know what, I need to pull up that invoice, or I need to pull up that purchase order. That's what I mean, the purchase order or the receiver. You just open up a tab next to it on the browser, jump into the system, whether you're using WebView or the or smrtr Access, and type in the values and pull it up, and you can see them, side by side, and just check anything if you needed to verify something. And the same thing would be true for your buyers, right? Now, depending on which version you have, some clients find that there's a few people that use the version that lives on the IBM, which is why if you are still on that version, maybe we want to look at what it would look like to convert over to the Windows version, because then more of your folks, like your buyers or people that maybe aren't living and breathing on the IBM and looking documents up through WebView, or would find that a benefit too. So the point is, the documents come in through a different way. They're already in the system. And when the invoice comes through, then they get put in the same system, so you can find all of those documents together. Now, I don't know if you're using bundling today, but that's another thing that we can do to help build out AP packets. So the idea with the bundling, which I should ask first, do you know if you all are using bundling today with your content side?
I'm not sure. My bet would be no.
Okay.
But by all means, yeah, please explain.
So the idea is, think about, you certainly understand the AP packet concept. I got to be able to have all the stuff that is justifying this check payment, right? So typically what that ends up looking like is you've got invoices and documents associated with the invoice, right? So usually the beginning of the process oftentimes is a purchase order, right? I create a purchase order. When a purchase order goes through the system, when it arrives into the smarter access, it can create a bundle. Now, the bundle is just sitting there. It's open. It's a group that has one document in it. And for group's sake, we really want more than one document. So it's a group with one document, and it's the lonely guy at the party. And then after that, the items arrive. And so you have a receiving process that takes place. Now, a receiving document gets created. That may never even, it could hit paper or not. We can capture it from the data without having to turn it into paper. But that document then arrives. And I'm just going to keep it very simple. Purchase order, then receiver, right? Then the invoice arrives. Now the invoice doesn't come through the same thing. So when the invoice arrives, it comes in through, we're going to assume your email for now. So you've got your invoice in the email, and then you've got the purchase order and the receiving document sitting in the content management system, and they're in a bundle and they're waiting. Okay. You complete the invoice process, it moves it into the content management system. Now those three documents are in the bundle. The next thing that happens is you run your checks. Right? When you run your checks, if we were creating your dummy check and sending that out to your vendors, we would also be saving a copy of the check. When the check arrives, that's the signal to the bundle to close and move it out. Now we know we have everything. Make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It sounds like basically we kind of do something similar, but it's all very manual. It's everything comes through. I touch everything, and then it gets entered, gets grouped together. I do my check run that creates the file that gets uploaded, and then we have an individual that manually goes through and scans that whole packet into S4I under the vendors, and that can be delayed, and then you have a vendor looking for backup right away, and it's it's back and forth, very very annotated and slow.
Right. So you can imagine that instead of having to do that scanning, unless somebody literally hands you a physical document that's got to be scanned in, but there's no reason to wait. That could be scanned in at any time. Like if you think about documents that might arrive through the receiving process, right? Maybe I'm going to assume for now that there's a good example would be maybe something like a supporting document for a delivery, right? In the food space, a lot of times you need COAs or COIs and things that may be coming over via email, but there's scenarios where they might arrive on the truck. Imagine I've got tomatoes and I'm expecting lot 45 or something like that. But then when they ship it, they actually send lot 44, something different. And instead of like emailing it over so that you get a digital version, they just hand a copy of the certificate of assurance to the driver. And when the driver does the delivery, they could hand you this extra document that was a part of it. Well, obviously that's got to be scanned in. When that comes into the system, you don't have to wait. It doesn't have to sit in a packet. It doesn't have to be transported physically from the warehouse or lost, right? And then get over to you. And then somebody else got to put it in the system. All of that can just go away. Somebody's going to scan it in right away so it doesn't get lost. And then that document and then becomes a part of that same bundle, essentially. So those capabilities are there. So if you want to dig into that more, we can certainly do that and better understand what that process looks like today for you guys.
Yeah, no, that's great. That is hitting all the checks. No, I'm excited to take this back to my manager, the CFO, and then the IT guy, and have their feedback. And which I know Eli,
I was gonna say Eli accepted, and he didn't show up.
Yeah, he's in Cali. He's in Cali right now.
Oh, good.
But yeah, he'll be back. I think Friday. So, but yeah, I'm excited. And like I said, with this being recorded, I'll make sure that the uppers definitely watch it and look it over, because they're privy to what all goes on, and thankfully, like, I have help from my team and invaluable. But they're all very much aware that we need to come up to date with a lot of our stuff.
Sure.
if we want to
You could let
continue
them know
growing.
too. When you talk with them, just let them know that I know Suzanne and I had worked on like some quotes and stuff and got everything that you all needed. And it was timing didn't really work out when they were looking at things before, and budgets sort of were aligned in a different direction for other projects and stuff. But it's also, we're in the second half of the year, coming up towards the end of the year, so it's a good time. I think I'm trying to remember. I think you guys were doing your budget stuff near October, so if they're working on those budgets, timing could be really good to try to push for something on that now. And if they need concessions or something, you don't get it if you don't ask. So tell them to call Suzanne and ask for some kind of help to get it done this year, and we'll probably be able to make it happen. So we're driving hard too. So let us know. We're happy to help keep the ball moving forward for you. And if you need additional demos or anything like that, by all means, reach out to me. And Suzanne's pretty buried right now. I'd probably pull her in so she can, say hi and whatnot. She has to shake hands and hold babies mostly these days instead of jump into too many of the normal meetings, as we've been growing a lot. But but she would always want to jump in and say hi to you guys for sure. So
awesome. Yeah, no, that's definitely what we'll do. I know that they are. Period 13 starts next week, I believe, or the week after. So we're right at the end of the fiscal. So it's about to get real busy.
Right, exactly.
But yeah,
out of curiosity, are you or any other team going to IFTA this year, or any other conferences?
Not Eli probably would go somewhere to any of them, if anybody, but not to my knowledge. Is that more IT, or is that more just the AI side?
So at least for IFTA, it depends on what other ones you might want to go to. I know Stephanie's headed to, I think, IMTS, but so IFTA is the International Food Distribution Seminar. So that group tends to be a lot of executives, and then IT. I'll typically see IT, and then AP. Honestly, I've got a number of folks I've met from AP there, although it's not always. AP teams, it depends. We see a few AP people, but a lot of compliance folks I've had come up to us and talk to us about our compliance solution, and a number of things along those lines too. So it's a pretty good mix, but it's definitely one where a technology is a big one for sure. So like Eli would be right at home. There's a tech conference, sort of a mini conference within the system there. Then they do some leadership stuff too, which is why a lot of the V and C level will attend. So that conference has got a lot of good stuff, and we pretty much attend every year. So we got a booth, so we'll be there.
Awesome.
You should tell Eli. Tell him to bring you. Say, hey, Eli, let's go to this.
Ooh, yeah, getting away from work. That would be
hard to do, right? Especially when you're the lone ranger over there.
Yeah, no, definitely. But I'm sure. Yeah, I imagine he would be there. But I'll definitely bring it up to him when I see him and see if he confirms or not. But I'll have this sent over to them as well. I'm excited to get their feedback, and once they take it to the board, see where we go from there.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, we're happy to help, and let us know whatever you need. We're here for you.
Thank you, guys, and thank you for putting this together. It's a great presentation.
Thanks.
Very digestible, so appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. Stephanie, do we have any other questions?
I think that's it for today. You guys covered a lot. I'm gonna put together the recording to send out. And feel free, Holden, to share it with your team and any value you find in that, so that we can move this forward. At least get it in the budget. If not, before the end of the year, would be excellent. I appreciate that. Cool.
Wonderful.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, guys. Have a great day.
Yep. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.